Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi, and welcome to the ISO Show. Well, recently we've been talking about COP26 and what different organisations and countries are doing in relation to reducing their carbon emissions. So we've covered a number of podcasts on the carbon verification standard and also carbon neutrality. But over the next couple of podcasts, I'm actually going to be running a few of these podcasts with a guy called Paul Robinson, who is our ISO 50001 guru. Now, Paul Robinson is managing consultant here at Blackmores. You may recall that he recorded some podcasts with us on how to implement ISO 45001, the health and safety standard. But I'm absolutely delighted to be joined over the next few episodes by Paul, who is going to be sharing all his hints and tips and knowledge and stories about energy management. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on ISO 50001. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Mel. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I know it's been a while, Paul. I know you've been very busy with implementing ISO standards for many different organisations across different countries. So it's great to actually come back to 50001, because this was a standard that we actually got involved with back in 2009, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Right back in the day, working with the NHS to implement what was the old BS 16001, which we worked with the South London and Maudsley NHS Trust to implement, and subsequently they then went on to transition over to the ISO 50001 standard. So yeah, we've been working with it a long time, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, for those listeners that aren't aware, a BS is a British standard. So BSEN 16001 was the first energy management standard, and due to popular demand from many different countries across the world, it became an ISO standard. So it's now ISO 50001. So we're actually going to be covering in this podcast episode an introduction to ISO 50001. But we will also be publishing a couple of other podcasts, which is actually a topic that we get asked about quite a lot, which is why ISO 50001 and not ISO 14001. So we will actually record a separate podcast on that, just to look at that in a bit more detail. And then we'll also have a couple of podcasts on how to implement ISO 50001. So that's where we'll take you through our 7 steps to success, which is our ISOlogy model, which you can find out more about over in the ISOlogy Hub. But for now, let's just dive into the standard itself. So, Paul, why have a standard for energy management? What's it all about?
Well, obviously, as you touched on, COP26 has just happened. There's a big focus on trying to maintain global warming to that 1.5 degrees increase, or trying to work within that. Right now, we're failing on that. And a big focus on the COP was all around, how do we achieve that? How do we get this back on track? Energy consumption is massive. We heard a lot during COP around coal and phasing out of coal power. And countries around the world to some degree resisting that as well. Places like China and in India fought back hard on that during COP26 and actually had the requirements watered down. But energy use is rising. It continues to rise, and there's increased demand for it. Any organisation generally uses energy in some form. Something I learned very early on during my associations with energy management systems is that energy in itself doesn't disappear. It transforms from one form of energy to another. So organisations will take energy in the form of, say for example, a fossil fuel like coal, burn that coal, and that energy is then transformed into heating, water, whatever it might be, powering gas burners, which in turn transforms that energy into another form, which ultimately is used for lighting, powering equipment. Some of that energy is lost, as heat energy goes out the window in poorly uninsulated buildings, that sort of thing. So energy as a subject area is really interesting, and it's particularly for organisations who are large energy users. An energy management system will be very relevant for them. And you touched on the fact that, or the question really around, why would an organisation choose 50001 over, say for example, 14001? Well, if your organisation is one of those large energy users, it's going to be very relevant there, and particularly if it's one of your most significant environmental aspects as well.
Yeah. So obviously we've heard about the fact that we are currently in a climate emergency. The science has been done. It's been done for decades now. What's the impact, to the environment of businesses not acting responsibly? I mean, what difference would it make to restricting global warming to 1.5 degrees actually make?
It's the difference between literally survival. We're at that tipping point now where, say for example, if we fail to achieve this 1.5 degrees, we're going to be seeing sea level rises. We are already seeing that. We're going to be seeing those extreme heat waves. I've done some work in Cyprus, for example, with energy management systems, and not uncommon for temperature to be hitting 45 plus degrees, and they're temperatures where human beings are struggling to survive, certainly for long periods. It's accelerating the Arctic sea ice defrosting, and releasing again that water into the oceans. All of that is having an absolutely catastrophic effect. All of that's extremely well documented, and we see the documentaries on the TV about it. And energy consumption, it plays a big part in that. We're still consuming fossil fuels at an alarming rate, and certainly the phase out of coal and other fossil fuels, gas, needs to be pushed very much harder. So responsible businesses certainly are on board with that, and are working towards it. We all recognise it's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to be a process, but certainly a well-managed energy management system can help support that, drive towards renewable energy, different energy sources, and a reduction of energy in organisations as well, which ultimately has an impact on organisations' bottom line and their profitability. We're seeing in consumer energy prices right now, and it's reflected across industry as well, massive increase in cost of energy right now, and certainly in the last 6 months, that's biting both consumers and organisations extremely hard, and will continue to do so as well. So again, all of these factors really suggest that it's time to maybe look at, certainly if you're not already doing an environmental management system, also look at the energy management side of things as well. The 50001 is certainly gathering traction.
Okay, so I mean, what's the main purpose of ISO 50001 then, Paul?
Well, if you look at the definition within 50001, it talks about continually improving energy performance, energy efficiency, energy use, and energy consumption. And all of those points have specific definitions around them within the standard, so I won't get into them in depth, but within any energy management system, you can be achieving all of those or some of those, and still achieve continual improvement. So like other standards, 50001 is all about continual improvement, but what we're talking about there is energy performance, energy efficiency, energy use, and also energy consumption being the key factors there.
Okay, great. So the structure of 50001 itself is similar to other standards, isn't it, in that it's based on Annex SL? Could you just walk us through what the main clauses are within 50001?
Yeah, sure. So in 2011, the standard went through its first full revision. In 2018, then it was subsequently revised and came out in the Annex SL format. So the first three clauses are basically explanatory clauses: the scope, normative references, terms and definitions. It's worth noting in the 2018 revision, there was a big focus placed on those terms and definitions, and there was a lot of changes around them. From there, then you get into the specific clauses, the requirements clauses, the ones that you're basically audited against, and these are the requirements of the standard that you need to implement. So it talks about context of the organisation. So in energy terms, we're talking about what are the energy issues that are affecting you, who are the interested parties, defining the scope and boundaries of your energy management system, and understanding the processes affected, looking at inputs and outputs. Very relevant for energy management systems, because the inputs are going to be the energy coming in. Outputs are typically products, services, and byproducts associated with energy use. Clause 5 talks about leadership. So in that particular clause, we're talking about top management commitment. Again, essential for any standard really. You really need top management behind this, providing the resources. the requirements for an energy policy and roles and responsibilities to be defined. We get into planning then in clause 6. Within that particular clause, this really is a central pillar really behind any energy management system. Talks about strategic and tactical considerations there, where on the strategic side we're taking those high level issues, those needs and expectations of interested parties, and thinking about the risks and opportunities associated with them in an energy context. At a tactical level then, or more sort of operational level, then we get into energy review, and that's where we're doing a deep dive into the organisation's energy, understanding their energy sources, their uses, past and present consumption, just to build up a picture of energy use within the organisation. And from that then you can start to think about setting objectives, targets and actions going forward. Linked in with there as well, you've got things like defining energy baselines and energy performance indicators, which again are a really central and important part of any energy management system. In clause 7, the support clauses, this very much aligns with other standards, other ISO standards if you're familiar with them. So it talks about provision of resources, competencies, awareness, communication and documented information required for the energy management system. In clause 8 we talk about operation, and that's where we're defining those operational controls required to help you manage your energy use effectively. And the standard also talks about design and procurement as well, so procuring of energy and also procuring of energy consuming assets as well, and having effective processes in place to ensure that energy is one of the factors that are considered when you are either upgrading your infrastructure or making a significant change or upgrade within your facilities. The other key clause within 50001 is the performance evaluation clause in clause 9, and particularly in regard to monitor and measurement. 50001 is a very data-driven, information-driven standard, so the requirements for monitoring and measuring in 50001 are quite specific, and equally are really important actually to be able to demonstrate that continuing improvement in energy consumption, use, efficiency, etc. that we talked about earlier. Clause 9 also covers internal audits and management review as well, just to make sure that the management system is performing effectively. Finally then in clause 10 it talks about improvement, and specifically in regards to taking opportunities for improvement and moving them forward and implementing them to drive that continuing improvement in the energy management system, but also recognising that sometimes things go wrong. The standard talks about significant deviations from energy use. Now the standard won't say what that looks like, it's up to the organisation to define what a significant deviation looks like, but what the standard does provide is that structure for how to then investigate, correct and then provide corrective actions to ensure that, you know, if you do have deviations from expected use, that you can correct them and again keep the management system on track. So really clauses 4 to 10 are the key requirements if you were implementing an energy management system that you'd be assessed against.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Paul. So just to recap on those clauses then, scopes 1, 2 and 3 are for information purposes. They're explanatory clauses. And then we've got clause 4, context of the organisation, 5, leadership, 6, planning, 7, support, 8, operations, 9, performance evaluation, and finally number 10, which is improvement. Thanks very much for giving an overview on all of those areas of ISO 50001 and the reason why this standard exists, the importance of it in helping to tackle climate change. In the next podcast, Paul's going to be joining me so that we can unpack clauses 4 to 10. And what we're going to do is dive down into those clauses to provide a greater explanation and also some hints and tips around those clauses and examples of, you know, what an assessor might expect to see as we go through those clauses. So thanks very much for joining us today, Paul.
Thank you.
And I look forward to catching up with you on the next episode.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.